Parshas Terumah on page 444. Okay, you ready for the Parsha? So this Parsha is going to discuss the construction of the Mishkan, of the Tabernacle, which we've addressed in the past. And we've also addressed in the past the placement. Fascinating placement. How there are two ways to view the need for this structure, the tabernacle, which inspired our ancestors for 4 decades in the wilderness, and then for many, many years in the land of Israel. Eventually becomes a permanent structure in Jerusalem known as the temple. And the placement of what really introduces to us our spiritual hub is an interesting one, because if you take the approach of some authorities that they needed this structure to somehow address the flaw, the issues of the sin of the golden calf, meaning due to the fact that they violated what the Almighty wanted with construction of this golden calf, they needed to construct something that they were commanded to do. So the obvious question is, okay, that should have been placed after the sin of the golden calf, right? And if on the other hand you take the approach which is known as Nachmanides' approach, that really the whole tabernacle is for the people of Israel to continue experiencing the revelation at Sinai. Nice, right? You were inspired at Mount Sinai, so you are inspired at the tabernacle, and eventually we are inspired at the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, and we, thank God, are still inspired because sanctity remains there, and therefore inspiration remains. Beautiful. But if so, why have this portion, right, detached really, or separated from the experience at Sinai with a whole parasha that has to do with the civil law, the mishpatim? Right, commentators deal with it. So today I'm going to share with you 2 Soloveitchik insights. You know what Soloveitchik insights are. There is a family known as the Soloveitchik family. Okay, very prestigious family, especially here in the shul. The Rebbe St. Marcus is a Soloveitchik, and the Soloveitchik, they have roots in great rabbinic families that go back hundreds of years, and they reached, I would say, the peak, the Soloveitchiks, with 3 great rabbis, starting in the 19th century into the 20th century. One of them was Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, known as the Beis Halevi. So he's not the Yosef Dov from Boston, he is the Yosef Dov from Brisk. In other words, he was the first of this dynasty. And the second one was Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, who really introduced a way of learning that became the norm for yeshivot in the 20th century. And the third one, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, was Reb Velvel Soloveitchik, Reb Yitzchak Zev Soloveitchik. His own story we'll get to soon, because I want to share with you first a brief insight from the Bet HaLevi, from Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik. And he notes that you should know, if you want to go ahead and build a temple, that's great. You want to build a synagogue, that's great. You want to have a homework that connects you to the higher being, that's great. But if your money is not kosher money, the structure will not achieve anything. Do not believe you could go ahead and create an environment of Jews coming together to relate to the higher being if your money came to you in a corrupt way. It's not going to work. And he obviously was one who was trying to get this message across as yeshivot were growing. And fundraising became far more greater. The idea of fundraising for a yeshiva, if you go back to the 18th century, it did not really exist because yeshivot were local. And the way yeshiva would work is that the local rabbi in his contract was actually told that part of his job and the responsibility and the community would take it upon themselves, that the rabbi will learn with a few young local students who the community recognizes that they have great potential. The idea of a yeshiva welcoming students from different regions or in different countries, and thus local support will no longer be possible, but rather they need support from external sources, that's only the 19th century. Started with Volozhin and other great yeshivot that started that approach of somehow becoming an international yeshiva. So if you're going to have students from all over the world, you also need money from all over the world. And not all monies that Jews were earning came from a kosher source. They perhaps came from people overcharging for goods that according to Jewish law you shouldn't, right? Perhaps they were not taken from Yerushin in an honest way. Perhaps a family inherited and there was a portion that belonged to a specific relative, but you had better lawyers and walked away with the chunk that you shouldn't. So therefore, yeshivot need to know that if you don't have a mishpatim, if you do not, before you start the process of building a structure, a spiritual structure, of either a mishkan or a bet hamikdash or a shul or a yeshiva, you have to know beforehand the laws of mishpatim. You got to know the civil law. You got to know what is owned by an individual and what's not. Only then can you start the process of having a Parashat Terumah. That's the insight that he shared. Okay, an interesting Beis Halevich insight. But what I want to do is a little bit out of order. We're going to go ahead and focus on the building of one of the three key vessels in the tabernacle. Okay, one of the three, or perhaps we'll add with four key vessels. And the most significant one we're going to be talking about is the Aron, the Holy Ark, that contained in it the luchot, the tablets. So here we go. So please turn to page 446, and we're going to read a little bit about the Aron, the Holy Ark. Ve'asu Aron, so this is on page 446, verse 10. They shall make an ark of this acacia wood. Measurements are given. It is plated with gold. It has a little bit of a crown, fine. And we are told that it has to have as well these staves for transportation. And regarding every single detail mentioned here, there are a lot of divrei Torah you've heard, and insight and explanations. But here comes a verse we're going to focus on, verse 16. Venatata, you shall place El ha'aron, in the ark, et ha'edut, right? The tablets of testimony. Shtei luchot habrit. Moshe came down from the mountain with two of them. They're going to be placed in that ark. Asher eten alecha, which I'm going to give you. Okay? Fine. Descriptions continue on page 448, but don't forget verse 16. And now the descriptions are going to focus on the golden cover that has these images of these cherubim, a discussion what exactly they are. And the cover is going to go on verse 21 now. You're going to place the cover on the ark from above. So far, so good, all information is needed. But now look at the second half of verse 21. Ve'el ha'aron titen, and into the ark you shall place what? Et ha'edut. What? The tablets of testimony. Asher eten elecha. Does that ring a bell? It does. So let's look carefully again at verse 16, the first half, verse 16, and the second half of verse 21. And you tell me, is the Torah not repeating itself? Verse 16, V'natata el Aron et ha'edut asher eten elecha. Verse 21, Ve'el Aron titen et ha'edut asher eten elecha. Interesting. Okay. Now, there's actually a slight difference between the two. Then in verse 16, we are told, V'natata, you shall place, into the Aron, into the ark. And in verse 21, it is, and into the ark. The ark is mentioned first, and then we are told, you shall place. Okay? So what's going on here? What's going on here? So some commentators take the following approach, focusing on the word edut, testimony. Testimony. What is a testimony? In other words, why do we call those incredible tablets, right? Tablets, Moshe comes down with them, something handed, something in essence tangible from the Almighty, given to the people of Israel. And it's called an edut because it testifies to something. When they would look at these tablets, with what's etched into it, they would recognize that there's a higher being. It was clear to them. It was clear to them that the physical world that exists is a very significant world. It's a wonderful world, and God wants us to enjoy it. But let's remember something. There is a God, and this is testimony that there is a God. Okay, that's one edut. Now, there's another edut that exists for us Jews, and that is all of Torah. All of Torah is really testimony, but it's a different type of testimony. Because the testimony is not so much proof for us that there's a higher being, but rather when we live by the teachings and the messages and the values of the Torah, we become that edut. That people, humanity, can look at the Jewish people and say, you know what? There's something about the Jewish people, right? They represent something and they inspire us. We, through Torah, become the edut. So there's the edut of the luchot, which is testimony for us that there's a higher being. And then there's an edut that when we make Torah is full of commandments, right? How we're supposed to live. When we make it alive and we live by it, that also is a edut. Okay? Now, at the end of 40 years, look throughout the years of the wilderness, they have the vessels, they have the tabernacle, and inside the tabernacle, in the inner chamber, there's the Holy Ark, and inside that Holy Ark, they had actually the tablets, and next to it, the broken tablets. The broken tablets were in the Aron as well. The rabbis learned from it something very important, that if you interact with a person who achieved a lot in their life, he was a Torah scholar, but unfortunately, as he got older, he forgot it, you should still honor him. You should still honor him just as we honor the broken parts of the Shivrei Luchot. And unfortunately, it's a title that we don't wish upon anyone, but it's something that there are times that people are called. They're called Shivrei Luchos, meaning there was greatness there, and recognize that there was greatness, and you should still be given all the honor. But throughout the years in the wilderness, what do they have in the Holy Ark? Luchot. What happens at the end of yes?
When Moshe came down, he had the Luchot. So why does it say Asher Eten Lecha in the future?
So it appears that this commandment was given to Moshe before he was actually given it. These words were, in the future, I'm going to give it to you, because he was still on the top of the mountain. That's how the commentators address it. Throughout the years in the wilderness, what's in the Holy Ark? Only Luchot. What happens at the end of 40 years? Comes Rameir in the Talmud and he tells us they added something into the Holy Ark. Guess what? A Torah scroll. There was a Torah scroll. Moshe Rabbeinu actually wrote 13 of them at the end of his life, and one of them was placed in the Holy Ark. And the Talmud gives us in detail how exactly it was positioned and the size and how it fit in the Holy Ark. That Torah is also a edut. It's not an edut of it's the edut of what we are about when we live by that text. And therefore, this is how commentators read these two verses. Verse number 1, meaning verse 16, when it talks about the edut in verse 16, it is talking about the luchot. Before you put the luchot, before you put the tablets into this ark, it's not an active ark, because ark without luchot is not an ark. So therefore we are told in verse 16, V'natata, first you shall place it, and then what does it turn into? When you place those luchot into the Holy Ark, what does it turn into? A activated Aron. What you put in the edut, the tablets, Asher Eten Elecha. On the other hand, on the second half of verse 21, Ve'el ha'aron, it's already in Aron, and it's been a successful Aron for already 40 years, meaning this is a verse about what's going to occur at the end of their 40 years. Ve'el ha'aron titen et ha'edut, this one refers to the Torah, the Torah scroll, Asher Eten Elecha. And it's the same word. In other words, there are people at times, that we get inspired when we see the hand of God, right? You hear people saying that Mary did hashgacha pratis. In other words, I went to the store and I needed a specific type of item, and there was only one left due to the fact that there's some blockages on the railroads. I couldn't get a specific type of sugar-free pudding that I needed and butterscotch flavor, and hashgacha pratis, God Almighty made sure that I have one, that there was one left, right? So that is it's popular to talk about the fact that there's testimony from your little pudding that there's a higher being. We have to remember that, that's nice, there's nothing wrong with it, of being grateful for the fact that you find your items when you need them. But there's another testimony that is needed, and that is that we live our life based on these teachings, based on the mitzvot, based on these values, that when the world looks at us and they say, yeah, Temet Ayin, there was just something about the Jewish people. They are impressive. There's something about the way they live. There's something about and we all know that when you interact with people that are really honest about what they do, right, and they're not phonies, and they don't focus on just this external facade about their Judaism, but that really impacts who they are, when we get impressed with them, we don't just get touched by a person, we realize that they symbolize something great. And that's what we call a Kiddush Hashem. That's the edut that we have to remember, that sits right next to the testimony that there's a higher being. The testimony of that there is a God sits right by the testimony that we are those messengers when we live by what we're supposed to live by. So that's an explanation that's given by several commentators like the Malbim and others of how we deal with the repetition. How we deal with the repetition. Fine. Now, another insight to deal with the repetition that appears was given by Revelvel Soloveitchik. Okay, the Revelvel Soloveitchik. Revelvel Soloveitchik was known as the Briskerov, of course, and he a fascinating individual. Obviously, very brilliant. It's a very brilliant family. If you have interacted with the Soloveitchiks, you know that it's bell curve, right? They're at the end of the bell there when it comes to talents. Revelvel Soloveitchik was knowledgeable in all of Talmud at a very young age. It's well known, and there was great intensity in their practice of Judaism, right? Great intensity. So, for example, we are told that when a person says the Shema, you have to be careful that every single word is actually said. So, the God-fearing Revelvel Soloveitchik, it would take him a very long time to get through the Shema, because he was, and this is not only on Yom Kippur, this was every single day, twice. He would sit there in great focus to get every word out. And I've heard a joke that someone once walked by and asked them, where's Revelvel now? And they said, he's at the Levavcha station. Meaning every word was like a station that he would stop and focus. And his fear of God really took over his whole essence. There's some very true, fascinating stories about him. He was stuck in Warsaw in 1939 as the Germans were bombing. And he was quite nervous. So he turned to his children. He had a few followers there to start doing research if there's any embassy that is considered safe, meaning perhaps the Germans are not bombing a specific area in town because we need to go there. And he was very nervous and doing his research. So a couple hours later, they returned to him and they said that there's nowhere safe in town. So he completely calmed down. The bombing continued. But he was the calmest person, went back to his learning as if nothing happened. And people asked him, what exactly happened? You were very nervous and now you're calm. So he said the following: when there was bombing, I had a halachic obligation to take care of my life. Part of it is to do research if there's somewhere safe. So I was nervous because I had a requirement that was Jewish law. Now that I find out that it's out of control, so why be nervous? It's up to the higher being. And I just went back to what I could make a difference. I continued my Torah study. So a very fascinating individual. He made his way he managed to make it to Israel with some of his family in 1941. He lost his wife and several children in the war. Established the yeshiva in Yerushalayim, known as the Brisk Yeshiva. He did not have a very large following in his lifetime. There were people who recognized who he was and his greatness and his wisdom. And he inspired a generation there, passed away in 1959, Erev Yom Kippur in Israel. His yeshiva really had a significant impact for, believe it or not, in North America, more than in Israel. And how was that? It became popular in the 60s, 70s, and it exploded really in the 80s, that top yeshiva students in North America would go to Israel to study in the brisk yeshiva, and they would come back with practices of the brisk school, which it's an own interesting discussion. But he, indeed, a very significant impact in North America, that if you walk into a place like Lakewood and many yeshivot, he's up there considered by those who had the greatest impact, according to many, on the structure of the yeshiva world. Now comes an insight that he shares, and it works as follows. We're trying to understand the Torah repeating something. Now when you repeat something, you're trying to get a message across. So we're going to start off with a question. You know the gates, the Titus, the Arch of Titus? Who's been there? You've been there? Yeah. You've been there. You walk backward or something? There's some kind of interesting custom. Did you see the menorah there?
Yeah.
You saw the menorah. Oh, you also been. You often was there as well. Okay. What is this an image from? What menorah was it?
From the Beis HaMikdash.
The menorah from the Beit HaMikdash that was taken in the year 70. Fine, no question about that. There's a record. It's a fascinating. It's probably an experience to see it. Thinking that you are seeing here what the closest to a picture, right? It's an etching. The closest to a picture of the Churban Abayis, right? So it's obviously an experience. It's a sad moment, and you have to be, you have to meditate as you stand there. My question is, was that the menorah that Moshe Rabbeinu made? You were there. You have to be there. Didn't know.
It wasn't signed.
Moshe didn't sign it. Modest. Okay. So I guarantee that was not the menorah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Well, guaranteed, not Moshe Rabbeinu. Things don't last 900 years, right? Even if they're not made in China, they don't last 900 years. It wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu's menorah. And I also know, because the Talmud tells us, they had to every once in a while, right, replace it. There were other exiles. We don't know if they brought back everything from Babylonia. Also, there's a strong feeling, if you look at the base of that menorah, it had images of serpents, all kind of images. I don't know if this was exactly the ideal halachically one. I don't think Moshe Rabbeinu was into those images that appeared on the bottom. So rather they were replaced. And if the menorah was replaced, right, for whatever reason, most probably the shulchan was replaced. So this is something that had to take place. When you have a structure operating for hundreds of years, right, you have to go ahead and do a bedek habayis, some fixing. During the Second Temple period, they had the vessels. There was one vessel, significant one, that was missing during the Second Temple period, after they returned from Babylonia. What vessel was not there in the Second Temple from the significant ones? The Holy Ark. Gone. Wasn't there. Why? It never returned from Babylonia, or when they were concerned that one day it will be taken away, they concealed it. Different explanations are presented. Either it's concealed, or it's sitting in Babylonia. Why did they not replace it? If they could do it with the Shulchan, if they could do it with menorah, if it could be done with the golden altar, why not do it with the Holy Ark, right? Yom Kippurim. Think about it
They didn't have the luchos.
Okay, so they didn't have the luchos. Excellent. So they don't open it anyway. No one's gonna know, right? It's like like in the Beit. Remember in the olden days? Yeah, you're right. I'm gonna get there. In the Beit in the olden days, when they would break a cup under the chuppah, you know that they would sometimes, I'm not going to mention the name of the rabbi, they would put inside the cloth a light bulb instead of a glass. Why? No one sees it anyway, right? So you might as well do something that is easier to break, right? No one's going to see it anyway. Why not have a holy ark and inside there's nothing there? Answer is, without the luchot, without the tablets, the Holy Ark has no use. Without the operating system inside, no, and it's wrong. It is actually wrong to have an Holy Ark without it. It's absolutely wrong, right? What's the idea behind it? Like, really, again, no one looks at it. Who cares? When you have a vessel that symbolizes Torah, says the Briskara, says Rabbi Milevsky, when you have that, which externally represents the honor of Torah, if you do not have in it Torah, it is the most destructive vessel in the world. To have an external appearance of Torah, right? The garb, the sprach, the language, right? The demand for honor. But inside, the Torah values are not impacting and making the individual, it's worthless. It's dangerous, it's wrong, it doesn't belong there. That's what we are told. Without luchot, which they couldn't replace that, they couldn't have a holy ark. And that's why Rav says the Torah is repeating it. And at the second time, you should know, ve'el ha'aron. In other words, titenet haluchot. In other words, it is not a aron. That's why it's repeated. The first one would tell us it's a place to put the luchot. If you don't have luchot, you could have a holy ark. The second time we're being told, if you don't have luchot, please, it is not a aron. Don't have a aron. It's me'akev. In other words, it is a must to have it. This is the insight of the Brisker Rav, and an important message for someone that worked on inner commitment, that it is so easy to do those things that were external. I used to have a teacher that would say the following, that you should know. This was a teacher in quite a Haredi school. So he would say in Hebrew, Aramaic, keres vezakan, meaning if a person has a belly and a beard, chatzi rabbanan, he's already half a rabbi. That's what his line was. Keres v'zakan, chatzi rabbanan, he's half a rabbi. So the idea is, and there's understanding, the danger of something external that is not inside, that does not have the core, it has absolutely no place in the Bet HaMikdash. A nice insight by Rav Soloveitchik, and the Soloveitchiks do focus on it. It was interesting that when, as I mentioned, by the 1980s, it became already in style for students of yeshivot, to want to come to Brisk. And it was in circles, in Haredi circles, it was considered like as if the pinnacle, right? Good for the shidduch to go ahead and spend a few years in Brisk. So many students wanted to get in, but they were overwhelmed, the Brisk Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. Eventually there were 2 Brisk Yeshivas to go ahead and address it. So there was a student in North America in my days that came with the Brisker to Avram Yeshua, was a grandson of Brisker Rav, and he said, I want to come to your yeshiva, which was common on a daily basis, and he would ask him why. So the traditional answer would be, I want to come to a very high level of learning, I like the style of learning, and then they would speak in learning, and if he was good, he would be accepted. So one young student comes to Rabbi Avram Yeshua Soloveitchik, and he says, I want to come to your yeshiva. And he says, why would you want to come? He says, it's good for the shidduch. He said, okay, come. So people ask him, why exactly, everyone else, you go through a whole experience and an exercise, why did you allow him? He says he was honest. He was honest. He's coming, he just wants to have a good name. If he's coming with honesty, he's the type of person that I want in the yeshiva. So I remember one of my friends mentioning that he came from a black hat yeshiva in North America, and he came to the Brisk Yeshiva, and then he saw run in the yeshiva some students that were wearing light colored hats. And that was like shocking. The Brisk Yeshiva? Like, why is he wearing a light gray hat, a light blue hat? So he needed to clarify because he couldn't learn because he was so disturbed from the image. And he was told, oh, they are Soloveitchiks. They're descendants of Soloveitchiks. And it appears that for the Soloveitchiks, because students in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and even into the 1950s wore colored hats, they felt you don't change a tradition. So they stuck to their tradition. Only if they became the head of the yeshiva, then they would upgrade. So it was very interesting in the Brisker approach. But the impact of Rosh Soloveitchik is indeed from the most significant. Now, next Vartor. So we talked about 2 Soloveitchiks. Now it's the time to talk about another. Rabbi, please turn back to the beginning of the parsha, a little bit out of order, and also chronologically, we're going to do something out of order, because we're going to quote an earlier authority, and we're going to have to read the beginning of the parsha again. Vaydaber Hashem al Moshe lemor, the beginning of Jewish fundraising. Are you ready for it? Ready for Jewish? Okay. Daber el bnei Israel, verse 444, line 2. Daber el bnei Israel. Now, if the goal is for the people to give, how would you expect that to be presented in the Torah. The Be'er of Bnei Yisrael v'yitnu li truma. They shall give me. And here, what is presented? Nope.
No.
V'yikhu li truma. They should take for me truma. To take for me truma. Can you clarify that a little bit?
It's hard to fundraise.
It's hard to fundraise. So it's one of the commentators says the goal is to find fundraisers who are willing to do that. Yeah. So v'yikhu li truma. They should take for me. Listen, I'm giving. I'm taking for you. Complexity. So in the Aramaic translation, turn to Onkelos and give me the key word here that he uses to translate a v'yikhu. Ve-yif-reshun. You know, like hafrashat chala, which is what? Separating. So v'yikhu is like separate. They should separate their truma. So what we're going to try to understand is what exactly is this about separating. So let's share with you two responses to get back, and we'll get back to the question. The story goes like this. It's in Spain, in the beginning of the 14th century. There was a shul, and there was an individual that owned property to the east of the shul. So basically there was a wall separating the shul and the property. This individual decided that, you know what, he wants to do something good. He wants to donate his area to the shul, to expand it. Nice, right? So when he comes to the shul board and he tells them that he wants to give another section that's to the east of the shul, people had a problem with it. What's the problem? So they noted that people had seats in the shul. If you're going to add an area, they're going to put in new benches, and they're no longer going to be sitting mizrach to the closest. It's not fair. In other words, they're going to... So there was a major to-do, and there were board meetings and votes, and they had a whole WhatsApp group about it. It was a major to-do. And eventually, Jews find solutions to problems, right? What they decided to do, what was known as the expansion of a heichal. This was common in many synagogues. I'm sure you could tell me where you've seen that there's a shul with seats, and then where the Aron Kodesh is, there's a large empty area that was called the heichal, that was just remain empty, and was used to honor the Torah. An area with no seats called the heichal. So that was the decision that was made. They're going to break the wall, expand the heichal, not one extra seat, but at least they honor it with the heichal. Okay, you think the problems are over? No, they're not over. Why? The person who made the donation wanted his name on top. This heichal was donated by so-and-so. And again, the board was unhappy, and they had meetings, and there was a threat of a breakaway. It was shreklach, a big to-do. So they decided they were going to turn to the greatest rabbinic authority in Spain at the time, and his name was Rav Shlomo ben Aderet, known as the Rashba, and they asked him for guidance. Is it acceptable to put your name on that which was donated to a synagogue? Rashba responds, 100%. We encourage it in Judaism. We encourage it. Because when people do good, we want people to know it's good, because then you inspire others to do good. And he has rabbinic sources for this idea, and by the way, this became part of halacha. This is quoted. This response is quoted later in the 16th century by Ramah, and that's why every single shul has names, right? And therefore in a yeshiva you could be in the Goldberg room, in the Weisner wing, right? The names upon names and plaques upon plaques. Judaism says, great, that's the way it should be. This is the story of the Rashba, and it became a go-to text and a go-to discussion for many years, what the Rashba talks about. Now we're going to have to move forward based on that information to the 17th century. I'm holding here, as you can tell, it looks like an old sefer. Does it look old? No. It's not as old as the author, meaning this was printed, what we have here, it's called Shelot V'Tshuvot, Responses Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek, we call it Tzemach Tzedek the first. Why? Because there was another rabbi who was called Tzemach Tzedek, and he lived in the 19th century. So this is the Tzemach Tzedek of the 17th century. Wonder something interesting, that both Tzemach Tzedeks were written by rabbis by the name of Menachem Mendel. Is it a coincidence that two people have the same name and they choose the same name for their book? No, because the numerical value of Menachem is Tzemach and Mendel is Tzedek, so both of them chose names that relate to the numerical value. So this is Menachem Mendel Krochmal, the Tzemach Tzedek the first. He was of a rabbinic authority in the 17th century. He's living during a challenging time for Jews in Europe, right? You talk about Chmielnicki of 1648, 1649. The economy was impacted. It was a very hard time. I shouldn't start with economy, but many of the shuvas, meaning they killed many Jews, but the response deals a lot with issues that developed due to the crisis they faced.
Where do you live?
Where did he live exactly? So in Nikolsburg. Okay, Nikolsburg and Moravia. Moravian authority. But he was known throughout the region. He was quoted afterwards by many authorities. He has some interesting questions. One of them had to do with the fact that in a community, the local fishermen who were not Jewish were bringing fish Erev Shabbos, and the prices would go up, a la Sobeys. Okay? In other words, they would shoot up when everyone would need it. Okay. Well, before holidays, meat before holidays, they would shoot up, which wasn't fair. So they asked him what to do, and he said, I have a simple solution. We're going to make a decree that Jews are not allowed to eat fish on Shabbos. And the market is going to crash as a result. Now they asked him, what's his source for it? So he shares with us a story that he in the days of Rabbi Gamliel, there was an issue in Jerusalem that women who would give birth had the halacha of having to bring birds as a korban to express their gratitude. Many times, women who lived in different regions would have 5, 6, 7 kids, would not be able to make the journey. At the end of that period, they would come and buy 7, 8, 9, 10 pairs of birds. But there was a problem that those who would be selling those birds would overcharge. Okay. Now it's fascinating that we are not the only ones that find in our sources where they address this problem of overcharging for birds. If you are familiar with the Christian Bible, what they call Yoshka, right? JC had an issue too, and we are told, or the way it's recorded there, is that when JC was so upset at the fact that they're overcharging, you know what he did? He turned the tables. That's where the term originates. He just walked over to those who were selling birds, and he was so angry at what they did for overcharging. He let his wrath out. He turned the tables, and that's what he did. Now that's a goyish way of dealing with the issue. Rabban Gamliel had a better way of dealing with the issue. He said, listen, how do they make their money? Because women were buying 8, 9, 10 pairs. So I'm going to go ahead. If they do not reduce the prices, I'm going to paskin that a woman who really is halachically required to bring 10 pairs could be yaitza with 1. So what's going to happen? The demand is suddenly going to drop. The prices are going to drop as a result. So again, it is a rabbit. You see that rabbis are not just allowed, but are required to go ahead and adjust, really in essence, adjusting the law to protect Klal Yisrael. In other words, it's nice to eat fish on Shabbos, right? But at the same time, to go ahead and make it impossible for the poor, so there was a manipulation of the law. That's what he quotes. He quotes this Rabban Gamliel to go ahead and allow the practice. And there are many interesting tshuvot that deal with it, but the tshuva we're going to be talking about is occurring in the middle of the 17th century, where there's a new wave of Judaism, or I should call new practices of Judaism that are being introduced into Europe at that time. As you know, mysticism makes its appearance in the 16th century, really in Sfat, and it trickles and makes its way and starts spreading into Europe throughout the 16th century, throughout the 17th century, really. And among the early practices that became popular, what were known as the Mizmor of Lamnatseach. I think it's Mizmor 67. There's a Lamnatseach there. And it's a section of a Tehillim that they would write out in a form of a menorah. Have you ever seen it? You ever pick up a Sephardi Sidur? You'll see that they have on the opening page this section of Tehillim that is written as in the shape of a menorah. Oh, here it is.
Right there.
See, we're protected. We have Yivracha Elokim, it's right here we have it. No Ashkenazi have donated it, believe me. This is a Sephardi and mystical, and according to the mystics, a shul is protected when you have it. Okay, so we're in good shape. Between this and the alarm system, this is the tradition. And it only what?
I said the alarm system doesn't work.
Okay. So this hopefully does. Now for sure we need it. So the story was the following: that there was a shul in a city called Prostitz. And in Prostitz they decided that's it. We need to be protected. So they put a klaf, meaning on a piece of paper, and they put it inside the Aron Kodesh. That when you open the Aron Kodesh, the doors would swing open. You would see the Lamnatseach. Beautiful. So one person realized, you know what? We need to upgrade here our security. So what he did was one night when no one was there, he etched into the door. He was an artist. He etched into the door this Lamnatseach. Okay? So next morning they come, they open, they see it, and okay, they were a little bit surprised. No one was known, no one was told about it. So they went ahead and they had this Lamnatseach. Fine. Now a week later when they open it, it was there, but on the bottom was the name. This beautiful Lamnatseach was etched by Shalom ben Chaim and Ilu Nishmas. He put on his own plaque. That already created a big to-do. And he talks about how the whole shul was extremely upset, how to deal with it. And they called a board meeting. We're actually told that the elders are coming together. But right before the meeting, someone went in the middle of the night and ripped off the plaque. Ripped off the plaque. Okay. So now there was a question. The person claims, I want my plaque back up. And so this was the big to-do. So they turn to Rabbi Menachem Mendel Krochman. They say, we need some guidance here. Is this acceptable? So what do you think he said?
Yes.
What?
Yes.
You say, yeah. Okay. So it appeared, thinking of the Rashba, that we recommend to go ahead and honor. But he said, in this case, not. He said, in this case, it's not acceptable. And he says the following, and it's a very important rule that shuls need to know into the 21st century. When people make a donation, right, and there's a plaque on something they donated, right? The mantle for the shulchan, or a siddur, or what? When the plaque does not mean you own it. The plaque, right, and your name means you have a mitzvah. You don't own it. When you give it to a shul, the shul and the community owns it. Your name, all the name is saying is, you have a mitzvah. So when a person goes ahead and says, what do you mean you're not listening to my opinion? It's my name on the Bet Midrash. How can you not follow what I have told you to do when it's my family that gave the money? You could say to them, I'm sorry, it belongs to the community. Your name indicates you have a mitzvah. Now you have an Aveira, but it is your mitzvah, nothing more, nothing more. And he says when a person etched it, right, it belongs to the community, and that was not right either. Because ideally, when you do something for a community, everyone wants to participate. When David HaMelech purchased the land for the construction of the temple, he did not give it from his own family or his tribe. He was careful to collect it from all of Klal Yisrael. And that was wrong what you etched. And the demand that you have your name there and you want to take credit, that doesn't work. Because even a plaque is not there for ownership. This is the rule. It's a very fascinating tshuva with lots of fascinating details. But what we walk away from is with an understanding. Whenever you give, it is not a giving of ownership. You have to feel that I've given, I'm detached from it. It's the shul's. It's not mine. And therefore the shul has a right. You know, we have issues, every shul has issues of people donating, you know, some kind of, let's say,
Some people donate Sefer Torahs and they still own it and they lend it to the shul.
they lend
for
it to the
certain-
shul. Correct. 100%. It's not a donation.
That's a loan.
But
They're
but
donating.
no one,
Right.
but the
It's not a
person who
donation.
made the loan, or even if they donate something, they cannot say, I demand that it's used. In other words, you have situations sometimes of people donating a siddur, right, for the shliach tzibur, which is an amazing thing to do. But then they'll come 16 years later and they'll realize that it's not used. There has to be an understanding. You donated it and you have the mitzvah for life, right? But the reality is the shul, the organization, has the right to do some kind of rotation. Don't think that you are the owner. Feel detached from your donation. It's very hard, by the way, right? To feel detached from giving, right? Ask in-laws, right? Or, like, in other words, they have, what do you mean? I paid for that, right? You bought that stroller. I gave you money for that type of stroller, right? So that's it. So therefore, feel detached from what you give. That is the key. Yes.
Does the shul have a right to resell the same thing that was donated before? In other words, let's say someone dedicates the Aron Kodesh,
Right.
and there's a plaque, and
Right.
then 10 years later,
Right.
or 20 years later, or 50 years later, somebody else comes along and says, I want to dedicate it. Okay, so now we need money, so we'll do it.
Interesting question. There's an idea called nishtakach shmo. In other words, when it was already forgotten that he donated, then yes. Or if it's worn out, then yes. Otherwise, there's an understanding that you donated. Now, nowadays, there's two types of donations. There's a donation that is known as that you force it upon the shul. In other words, if someone comes with just sidurim and says, I want the shul to use these sidurim, that already, the shul has every right 2 weeks later to decide otherwise. On the other hand, if it's a shul that had that was fundraising, and they walked away a little bit, you know how it is, or the way it should be, is that when the shul has that you could donate a mezuzah, you're not paying the $75 for the mezuzah, you're hopefully paying $7,500 for the mezuzah. Then already there's an understanding that it remains. So there are differences within it. What's the key word for giving? The key word for giving to
Separate.
institution of Torah is to feel
Separate.
detached. To feel that you are harush, like afrosha's challah. You know one decides to bite into the challah they did in afrosha. So now we could turn back to the first fundraising for a Jewish institution. Daber Bnei Israel, not veitnu. You're not giving. Veikuli truma. Aramaic, afrashusa.
Separate.
They're separating. So the veikhu is to feel you've given it, but you're not in control of the Jewish temple. The Jewish temple is to be inspired how to live. The mitzvah you have, wonderful mitzvah, but control is given to the community and representatives of the community. That's what we have for the Parsha. Thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you Be'ezrat Hashem next week.